Venus and star blessings, everybody. Welcome back. Today I want to talk about Saturn stationing direct, which is actually happening basically as we speak. So I've given a little bit of thought and reflection to what it's meant really for all of us, I suppose. But having said that, it will be, you know, a personal experience for all of us, because it depends where Saturn is passing through in your chart, and whether you use whole sign house chart or whether you use a quadrant house system. Personally, I recommend you use both. Both are valid, and both will show you different things. Saturn has been retrograde since June of this year. It has, the furthest it got into Pisces was 7 degrees. And that is quite telling, and I think very reflective of the collective energies as well, because the first 10 degrees of Pisces, in terms of the 36 faces or decans as they're called, is actually ruled by Saturn. So the energy of Saturn ingressing into Pisces and only reaching the point of 7 degrees has really meant that, first of all, Saturn hasn't moved very far at all. And that first decan that it hasn't even covered the first decan, it got to 7 degrees. But that early 10 degrees of Pisces is ruled by Saturn, which I think is why this energy actually has been very, very difficult. First of all, Saturn is a malefic. It is a challenging energy. It is a planet that corresponds to our conscious construct of reality. It is what helps us actually create boundaries. It is what helps us create a protective kind of defense mechanism around us. It is where we have to apply commitment, discipline, dedication, and do the work. And it is also a planet that creates separation and loss, loneliness, isolation, depression, repression, oppression. It's it is quite a difficult energy, especially from the point of view of our physical experience. Saturn does have a much more esoteric level to it. He is the gatekeeper in esoteric astrology, actually. And Saturn, in truth, is one of our greatest teachers. But the lessons and the process with Saturn is felt as sometimes very painful, sometimes very isolating. Sometimes we feel totally unsupported or disconnected from things or people or life. Saturn actually constricts and contracts, the exact opposite to what Jupiter does. Jupiter expands and opens possibilities and potential for our life circumstances, but Saturn actually confines and constricts us. So it does feel like we are being squeezed into a corner, as it were. And Saturn actually does rule corners, by the way. So those are some attributes to think about when you're thinking about Saturn. And so depending on where it's traveling in your chart, of course, we'll speak to the matters of what Saturn is asking you to work through at the moment. The tricky and bizarre process of this is that the archetype of Pisces, which is where Saturn is traversing at the moment through the zodiac, literally represents a complete opposite of what Saturn represents. So Pisces is, first of all, has no boundaries. Saturn helps us create firm, clear boundaries in our life. Saturn puts up the borders, the structures, and Pisces actually diffuses all of that. It has no concept of boundaries. Pisces is dreamy, it's intuitive, it's empathetic, it's sensitive, it's creative, it's imaginative, it's the mystic. It's a connection to the oneness of all that is, and the collective unconscious as well. So you've got two energies that are the complete antithesis to one another. And Saturn in Pisces, which is essentially a 2.5-year journey, is taking the world and ourselves individually through a process that corresponds to endings, finishing things, completing things, allowing things to die, as it were. That could also mean certain dreams that we had, certain aspirations and dreams, goals that we had and things like that have come to some sort of realization within us that we can no longer pursue those things, or we must change how we do XYZ. So the way we used to do something, that could even be activities, certain activities that we did. Of course, it always comes down to you, right? And how old you are, and the story of your life and things like that. Obviously, a Saturn in Pisces transit for a 2-year-old is going to be very different to a 20-something-year-old or a 40-year-old, right? So these are the more specific details and nuances that must be understood relative to reading Saturn in Pisces, right, for ourselves. So for the last, what is it, 5-6 months, something like that, Saturn has been retrograde. And in evolutionary astrology, when a planet is retrograde, it is said that it corresponds more to an individual or a soul that is really constructing their own pathway, right? Because planets moving direct tend to correspond more to the consensus reality. And Saturn is the consensus reality. But when Saturn goes retrograde, there is an opportunity for us actually to integrate that Saturn energy inwardly, so that we basically become the author and authority of our own life. Authority is a word that's associated to Saturn. The more we project Saturn's energy onto this 3D earth plane, the more we will experience Saturn coming at us, as it were, from out there, meaning we feel more restricted, we feel we are being dictated to, or we feel a strong sense of authority coming at us for whatever reason that may be. So actually the trick with Saturn is always to learn how to integrate that energy. That actually applies to every planet, really, especially the outer planets, because the outer planets are the ones that we tend to project a lot more. But with Saturn, it feels really awkward and difficult because it is an energy that speaks to constriction and limitation. And the more we project it outside of ourselves, the more we experience that limitation, that constriction coming at us from our circumstances that connect to our life, people, governments, whatever it may be. So Saturn retrograde is always an opportunity to internally process and integrate, becoming the authority of our own life structure, our own life perspective, the construct consciousness of our life. Let me just actually bring up a chart for the moment. So this is a chart just for today, based in Melbourne, Australia. So never mind the position of where the planets are, it doesn't really matter. What we're looking at is actually Saturn, the fact that it's stationary. As you can see, there it is right there. It's moving to stationary direct, right? Probably by tomorrow, I think it is. So when a planet stops to change direction, it always is moving quite slow. And depending on the planet, the slower it moves. So for instance, Pluto might take 1 month to move 1 minute as it's changed direction. And Saturn is also a planet that has a longer cycle, so it's a slower moving planet. So that too will move slower. When a planet stops to change direction, it's sort of hard to describe really in words, but there's something very, very potent about the energy of that planet during that process, because it's literally stopped to change directions, and that energy is greatly emphasized. It's a very powerful portal of energy, if you like. So things can happen even just through this stationary period. Things can change directions, or situations can arise. There can be a stronger sense of the energy being felt just because it's actually stopped to change directions. Now, you can see there that it's 0 degrees of Pisces, right? So what we're looking at for the next few months is that it's going to be in February of 2024 where Saturn passes over the degree that it changed direction in to go retrograde. So it's basically from now until February, it will only have moved 7 degrees. So even though Saturn is now about to move direct, there will be a momentum, a shift of direction, or a shift of the energy moving forward again. And I would think that for the next few months, it's probably more about seeing more clearly, perhaps, the work that we have been undertaking and undergoing internally within ourselves, from the point of view of where Saturn is in your chart, how you've worked with that energy. You will start to see now the fruits, the labors, the rewards, whatever you want to call it, the creations of what's been going on the past 5 months while Saturn has been retrograde. So unfortunately, though, we've got to still work with Saturn being at the first decan of Pisces, which is ruled by Saturn, for the next few months. So I don't think it's going to feel a lot easier until Saturn actually moves into the second decan, which is later next year. And that second decan of Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. That's when I think we're going to really reap some rewards that feel beneficial, that feel like we are really growing, that where we can feel more expansive in the Saturn in Pisces energy. Saturn ruling the first decan of Pisces is implying that there's a lot of restriction in that first decan of Pisces, just as Saturn is moving through it. And that can feel very frustrating, very limiting, very challenging, and it can really affect our mood and our sense of optimism and inspiration, and a sense of encouragement, which all those words belong to Jupiter. Saturn can make us feel like we're trying so hard with something. It might be starting a business, it might be changing certain aspects of your business, it might be writing a book, it can be absolutely anything, right? But something that means that you have to really apply yourself and really be very dedicated and serious with the time that you are putting into this matter. At the same time, though, we are also going through a process of things finishing and ending. So Saturn in Pisces, it's two faces of the one coin. On the one side, there's this ending taking place, and on the other side of that coin is a new beginning taking place. And we're not going to see the new beginning really until Saturn gets into Aries. That's when we're going to see the true sort of hallmark of that beginning. But it does mean that while Saturn is in Pisces, that we work on these themes, right? These projects, these processes. Again, it depends on what house Saturn is in. You know, if you've got Pisces in your 12th house, just like this chart has here, for instance, well, this chart actually has Pisces in both 12 and 1, but let's just say it was whole sign houses and all of Pisces was contained in the 12th, which would mean that this chart has the natural order of the zodiac around the wheel, right? Then it's a double sort of signature. You've got Saturn in Pisces in the 12th house, you know. I would think that would be a stronger reflection of a much deeper spiritual process of growing and dying at the same time, allowing things to finish and to complete. Because of Pisces' immense sensitivity as well, and because of Saturn's can be a very harsh sort of energy, and Pisces is the sign that loves to escape and not deal with reality, because sometimes reality is so mean, so cruel, so hard, so overwhelming, so exhausting. You know, if you had Saturn in Pisces in the 12th, you might just go off in a mountain somewhere and just totally disconnect from the entire world. And I can certainly relate to wanting to do that at the moment, because there is just so much devastation, you know, going on the planet. So I think really for the next few months, it's really about remembering that even though you may not see a great deal having shifted and changed with Saturn moving through a particular house in your chart, remember, Saturn is the planet that always asks us to be very, very patient. You can never rush anything with Saturn. It's the Lord of time. Saturn is the Lord of time, the Lord of karma, and the Lord of work, if you like, you know. So it's where we have to meet our responsibilities, do the work, and if we can do it with a sense of respect and honoring what Saturn is asking us to recognize and take responsibility for, and have very little resistance to it, then we can work more closely with integrating that energy. The resistance to Saturn only projects it and pushes it further outside of ourselves. And so the simple explanation to projecting things, which is an unconscious thing for the most part, if not all, is that when something is projected onto something else, then that something else just mirrors it back to us. So it's a disowning of that energy, and then it has to come at us through our external environment, through a person, a situation, etc. That's why Saturn is one of the greatest teachers, because when we understand what Saturn is asking of us, then we can work in alliance with Saturn, with that energy. And also, one other thing to always remember is that whatever transit you are looking at, you can still apply this same principle to this this understanding, this teaching, and that is that wherever Saturn is in your natal chart, as Saturn subsequently transits around your chart from the moment of your birth, which it will just continue to do that for as long as you live, it is always taking with it, through the transiting movements as it moves around your chart, the essential essence and inherent signature of where Saturn is in your natal chart. That underlying story of where Saturn is in your natal chart is always going to be in some way mirrored and reflected through Saturn transiting around your chart as well. It might be more subtle, but it's still there. It still holds tremendous meaning. So I just wanted to read a couple of comments from this book here, Saturn, A New Look at an Old Devil by Liz Green. Now, Liz Green is a very psychological astrologer. She's not really into prediction and forecasting very much at all, from my understanding anyway. And some people like her, some people don't, doesn't really matter. She has got some really interesting points to make about Saturn. I just want to read this. This is a comment she makes about Saturn in the water signs, which you can apply to the water houses. Saturn in the watery signs and houses is worthy of first place because it is in this area that he displays his greatest ambiguity and also his greatest emotional suffering. As man is only now beginning to learn how to think objectively as a group, and as the majority of people are still polarized in their feeling natures, Saturn in water is responsible for a great deal of the loneliness and isolation so apparent at this present time. Now, she clearly is referring to the time where she had written this book, and this book was written quite a long time ago. Let's see. 1976. Ironically, what she says there is still valid today, isn't it? Especially with the matters that are going on in the Middle East. She says, it is of some help for the individual who has Saturn in a watery house or sign to recognize that the potential in terms of inner peace, understanding and wisdom is as great as his potential for despair, if he will only turn inward to the realm of the feelings and of the unconscious. The unconscious is always connected to the three water signs, three water houses, and also Pluto for that matter, but most certainly Pisces 12th house Neptune. And Pisces 12th house Neptune is the collective unconscious as well. So Saturn moving through Pisces is deconstructing a reality that all of us constructed together. It's dismantling and ending a very specific narrative and reality that we've all created together as a collective, and then, of course, as individuals in our own life. I was saying yesterday on my Facebook page that it feels like the earth is like an onion, and all these layers are just being peeled off quite fast, actually, especially in the last 3 years. There's been an intensification and amplification of chaos, disorder, deception, disillusionment, lies, propaganda, you name it, it's all there, and but it's all being exposed. And the exposure of it is actually necessary and to our benefit as well, so that we can actually align more with what's authentically true for us and about who we are, which is infinite consciousness, and recognize the illusions that either we have created or contributed to in some kind of way. So Saturn in Pisces is getting real, if you like, about the disillusionment of these layers around the earth, because the earth herself, which is a living, breathing entity that gives life to us, and nobody should actually claim any ownership of her. This earth plane, Gaia, is God's land, God's creation, and Gaia herself, the mother, is the one who gives us breath. Trees give us oxygen. don't they? So I find it fascinating that after thousands and thousands and thousands of years on the planet, human beings haven't evolved very, very much, because it doesn't matter what story you look at, what part of the earth you look at, what group of people you look at, the problems that exist derive from greed and possession, which is second house Taurus. Second house Taurus in ancient astrology is called the gates of Hades, Pluto. So the second house, in fact, is a very difficult house, something that rarely gets mentioned and certainly will never get mentioned in popular mainstream astrology. The matters that are presenting these cataclysmic events all derive from this sense of ownership and beliefs, of course, as well. The conflicting beliefs, my belief versus your belief, my religion versus your religion, my religion is right, your religion is wrong, so on and so forth. And I should own this, and we claim rights over this, and so on and so forth, right? What is that? That's second house Taurus, Pluto, Hades ruling that house. At a very unconscious level, that's how it plays out on the earth, by the separating desire called greed. A separating desire is something that Jeffrey Wolf Green has coined from the point of view of the soul having two very distinct desires, one to separate from its source, one to return to its source. The separating desires connect to things like greed. Separating desires within themselves are not inherently wrong. They are the reason we are here experiencing life. But evolution takes a very, very, very long time. Look at how long it's taken, and still is taking, people to understand that this land is a living, breathing entity that belongs to nobody, actually. Second house Taurus, attachment, possession. It's Taurus, Scorpio, actually. It's that axis, but it's very specifically Taurus. So with Saturn moving through Pisces, some of the gifts that are presented to us are about committing to a more devoted, committed process to our spiritual self and our spiritual connection to God. At the highest level, that would be Saturn in Pisces. And on the other hand, it is also the recognition of the disillusionment we may have had over certain situations or people or conditions or whatever it is in our life, and then certainly collectively as well. So yeah, it's I think it's still going to be a lot of hard work moving forward with Saturn in Pisces, and bear in mind it's going to be there, you know, for another couple of years, 2 years. And so the second decan is ruled by Jupiter, which is fantastic. I think that can be a strong period of growth, basically. And Jupiter, being the ruler of the second decan, is in its own home there, right? Because Jupiter rules Pisces. So there's something very dignified, accentuated, something very uplifting, inspiring about Saturn's presence in the second decan, because it is overseen by Jupiter. The last decan is Mars, and I won't talk about that now because that's quite a while away, but just for your own reference, the last decan of Pisces, so from 20 to 30, that's ruled by Mars. So that's going to be very interesting, because by that stage, what's going to happen by that stage? no, that won't happen. I just had a thought, but that's not accurate in timing, so don't worry about it. So that's pretty much it, really. Just have a think about where Saturn has been in your whole sign house or in your quadrant house or both. And just, I guess, understand that, you know, for the next few months, Saturn is going to, it's going to go through that post-shadow period where it will reach 7 degrees. That'll be its post-shadow, which is the degree that it went retrograde in June of 2023. And it won't be until Saturn moves to 10 degrees of Pisces when we're going to feel the presence of Jupiter, which is going to make a big difference to this experience of Saturn in Pisces. But it still is Saturn in Pisces at the end of the day. So we are looking at a 2-year cycle, or thereabouts, of Saturn really closing a lot of chapters in our life and preparing us for the new birth, the new beginnings, which will be Saturn in Pisces, in Aries, pardon me, conjunct Neptune in Aries. That's going to be absolutely a new paradigm, a new reality. It's so obvious because of everything that's going on the earth, that has been going on, specifically the last 3 years, because a lot of this stuff has been going on for decades in one way, shape, or form. But it is just the case that the last 3.5 years or so has been, it's like everything has been compacted into this 3-year period. And it's just that compacting everything has squeezed the hell out of that. And it's made everything so much more intensified, which is why I think a lot of us, if not all of us to some extent, have felt quite depleted. You know, last month in October, we had those solar and lunar eclipses, which were really, really difficult. Look at what happened. Look at what transpired in the Middle East from those. It's been very, very challenging, very, very challenging. And, you know, Saturn in Pisces could very easily be feeling low moods, depression, feeling uninspired, you know, uninspired because of the dreams that we held, the perspective that we had on this reality, which we're discovering was just, a lot of it was disillusionment, right? Because the things that have been presented, the reality that's been created, as it were, is based on lies. And one of the things about Pisces, Neptune, 12th house is the very deep sense of disappointment, because you're wanting that ideal that Pisces 12th house Neptune represents, the ideal. Remember, Pisces is the 2 fish bound by a cord swimming in opposite directions. And symbolically, what that is referring to, it refers to a lot of things, but one thing it speaks to is one side of Pisces is just totally at one with consciousness, God consciousness, spirit, totally in tune and aware of a paradise where there is just complete and utter peace and love and beauty. And the other fish swimming in the other direction is bound here on the physical earth plane and has to deal with the harsh reality. That's why with Pisces energy activated, there can be this sense of despair and loss and confusion and really wanting to escape the harshness of the reality. So that's part and parcel of what's activated quite a lot with Saturn in Pisces, because it's the hard reality of what is not, the hard reality of the disillusionment, the illusions that are all being cracked open. And that brings up in all of us a sense of disappointment, deep disappointment and despair as well. So it's not an easy passage, but if we can recognize what we've been disillusioned about, have some acceptance about that, and start working on what is more realistic, what is more truthful, working on our spiritual God relationship, making that a priority over everything, can help us navigate through the chapters of our life, the stories of our life, the conditions of our life. And I think Saturn in Pisces can help us to do that if we are willing to work with the Lord of Karma, Lord of Time, Lord of many different things in this way. That's what it's asking us to do in Pisces. So let me know of your thoughts and how you've been feeling with this Saturn in Pisces. I've found it quite difficult, and it will actually pass over my Venus, because I have Venus in Pisces and I've got Neptune conjunct my Venus, and it has been there for the last 2 years. It's a very long transit because it's 5 hits, 5 passes, so it's a super long transit, and that's been a lot of disappointment for me in a lot of different ways, but also a lot of wonderful, inspirational, spiritual insights and jewels that have come to me. So I'm very grateful, but I'm just very aware of the two very different positions: disappointment and a sense of feeling more at one with spirit, actually. And here we have Venus transiting Venus opposite Neptune, which is just there for a day or so. She's just past that opposition, actually. So she was there over this weekend. Today is Sunday here. So it's still active, and you know, it's a small window. But if you, for example, have Neptune conjunct your Venus at the moment, or Neptune opposite, you might have Venus in Virgo natally. So that's when this particular transit, well, if you've got Venus in Virgo, then you might have a 3 or 5 time pass of Neptune over opposing Venus. Anyway, point being that when you see these transits, always look back to, again, your natal signatures as well. You might have a Venus opposite Neptune in your chart, or a Venus Neptune conjunction. If you've got a Venus Neptune aspect and there comes a Venus Neptune transit, your Venus Neptune aspect signature in your chart is activated and highlighted and animated. Otherwise, you might have this transit go past and not notice much at all. There's also a Mercury-Uranus opposition that's just happened as well. Those 2 planets are the rulers of astrology. That's a very, I like Mercury-Uranus transits and aspects, because they really help us break down our conditioned mindsets and open us up to a much more liberated and freer way of thinking. And I think that's important, because a lot of the problems in life, really in general, are very much associated to limiting mindsets and limiting beliefs, or limiting psychology that connects to a perspective we have, a judgment, a bias, a prejudice. Where do those things come from? Those positions that we take, they come from our thoughts. So when you see Uranus opposite Mercury, that's a great window to feel inspired, and to break out of maybe some old mold, some mental pattern that you have that keeps you very limited in your understanding or your perspective. And that can be generally, or that can be on something very specific. anyway, they are very short transits. And then Venus is going to approach, well, she's pretty much there now, forming a trine to Pluto. Again, that's a small window, so that will just be there for a couple of days. But if you have a Venus-Pluto aspect in your chart, this transit could be very, very important. What else? And we've got the new moon in Scorpio coming up in a few days' time, which I'll come back and do a separate video on that. Which, you know, I've got to be honest, it looks it looks like it's going to be a difficult lunation cycle, because Ceres will be there with Mars, Sun, Moon, opposite Uranus. The opposition to Uranus from an individual general perspective is amazing, actually, because again, it can be the very thing, the very advocate for liberating our fixed Scorpio patterns, fears, personal limitations. Uranus is always the liberator, the one who sets us free. Most people don't work with Uranus energy. Uranus is not a consensus reality energy. But from the point of view of what's happening in the Middle East, I don't think that looks very promising, if I'm going to be honest. But I will talk about this soon. I'm going to leave it here for today. And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts about Saturn in Pisces and how that's been for you. I was saying before that I've personally felt it, yeah, very difficult. It's in an area of my chart that's not necessarily easy, but it has also really, really helped me in something huge that I've been wanting to do for such a long time, and that I haven't. And I've started it since Saturn went into Pisces. And that is, I've started teaching my astrology classes. And that I used to teach astrology over 20 years ago, basically a 2-year course back then. And now I've started to reconstruct my classes, and it's just a whole new journey, which is amazing. I'm loving it because I'm really dedicated. I'm really putting in the time, the hours. It's something that's going to be a big part of my life, my future moving forward, you know. And it does require discipline, hard work, hours, mental concentration, you know, all those things, and feeling limited as well, you know, feeling like I can't do this because I have to do these things over here. So I might want to go out and socialize every weekend and whatever, just as a way of example. And I can't, because I've got to put my energy and my time in these sorts of things over here at the moment. So it's about sacrifice, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. And Saturn in Pisces would be a sacrifice. Pisces is a sign of sacrifice. So if you found that you've needed to sacrifice certain things in your life, well, Saturn has been in Pisces. Or what has Saturn in Pisces meant for you? I'd love to hear back from you. And I'll see you guys very soon with the new moon in Scorpio. Much love.